So however far apart we are geographically, we have long been friends. Republics that have enjoyed, as I said, the experience of struggle for independence, post-colonialism, and I think in the last years, people with a very positive vision for a Europe of peace, cohesion, and inclusion in every respect. Of course, those connections to which I refer, they are diverse and they reflect history itself. The contribution of Richard Moore-Farr, former governor of Malta, from 1847 to 1851, which was the period of the Irish famine at home in Ireland. He hailed from Kildare in the east of Ireland. and he was a prominent advocate, indeed, for what you have just said, for the rights of Catholics in both Ireland and Malta. And then in the 1920s, Irishman Dr. Michael Dundon led Malta's Parliamentary Labour Party and was responsible for the health portfolio. We cherish too Ireland's connection with Malta's Henrietta Chettard Chevalier, who formed part of the Rome escape line in World War II, led by Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, which saved approximately 6,500 lives of Jewish people and Allied soldiers, with individuals like Chettard providing safe houses. As Ireland approaches the 50th year of our European Union membership, together we recall the positive, indeed transformative effect which European Union membership has proved for both of our countries, allowing us to work together to share, to shape a cohesive and just union. This is something we continue to share energy on, based on fundamental values of social justice, and indeed, as you rightly stress, multilateralism and respect for the rule of law. And of course, our two nations, we see ourselves as Europeans, with much to offer the European project as it continues to evolve. The other challenges that we must address with urgency, and I'm delighted to share your concern, be it the climate crisis, the humanitarian crisis, rising inequality, or indeed the corrosive destabilizing effect of the ongoing democratic crisis that grips much of the world. Concerned as we are by what is happening close to us, we must realize that while our concentration is what is before our eyes, we must not forget that these challenges cannot afford to be neglected, as indeed our planet burns, and indeed we have growing hunger in areas in so many parts of the world.
I think there's no one, I think now, seriously doubts the science that is there in relation to climate change or the threat to biodiversity. What is more difficult is getting people to accept that models are wrong. The model, for example, of unending growth should not be sustained, because it is related to what has happened in relation to both. Then in both the loss of biodiversity and in relation to the global warming. I think, for example, of those work and there are always people struggling against to allow the new to be born. I think of Ian Goff's fine book, Heat, Greed and Human Need, which combines the whole question of the challenge of climate change with issues of social justice, and the accompanying book by his partner in relation to universal basic services. Why has it to be regarded as such an incredibly mad idea to suggest that meeting the basic services across the world in relation to health, housing, education, shouldn't be a noble idea? And the reason it isn't a noble idea is because of the particular bordered pursuit of interest by the most powerful. So in the main cases, this is going to say that's just another one of those Michael J. Higgins' speeches. I have actually lately dropped my restraint in speaking of what I now beginning to call now a species failure. Gifted as I was late in my own thing, now that I have the opportunity of doing work in philosophy, work in some different subjects. And I think of the long run of the rational and the idea of progress, which stood behind colonization and domination in so many parts of the world, and how it traced its way back to Descartes. I would often refer to that as the Cartesian fallacy of assuming that unless it can be observed and measured, it isn't important. But then you add to it all of the great phenomenological work and the rest of it. But even with all our work, in many cases, there's been such a great failure of the rational a failure in relation to the different capacities and so on. Occasionally this is given great voice in literature, and it is not accidental in many cases that many of the finest contributions in literature, including those of James Joyce, has been in fact by those who have to move into an exilic relationship with what is presented to them as the rational and the sensitive experience of where they are. I think we've come through a dark time in relation to COVID. And in relation to that, in many cases, it's sometimes said, once again, we fall back, and actually we're a bit loose with language when we say we all cooperated in relation to response to COVID. We did not. We failed to actually allow global access to vaccination. We're still failing in relation to allowing global access to anticipation of future pandemics. We are still holding back in relation to fundamental changes in our own behaviour. And therefore, it is a great time to be young, to abandon not to abandon, but to move into and look at the shape of new paradigms that will combine issues of social justice, issues of responsible ecology, and issues of awareness and sensitivity.
I'm too late. Were you ready for the show?
That for many of you from Ireland, it was a very distressing time, the experience of COVID. People who could not make contact with their relatives, people who had made arrangements to resume connections with them in Ireland, people indeed who had relatives who were vulnerable and so on. But I think that we're at least at this point where we can do all those things which are in fact very Irish, which is reaching out to each other and caring for each other. But there's so many. What I think is exciting too is that when reminding me, I had my speech today at an event which was co-sponsored by the University of Malta, how good it is that our young people are exchanging each other, again responding to something different to this darkness where we are now. What a good idea Erasmus was, young people crossing borders in each other's countries and benefiting from it. A few years ago, I was asked to speak about Erasmus, and there are actually 1 million babies who were born to Erasmus students who had come together during the experience. This is a Europe full of hope and life and joy. There are at the moment connections between Maltese universities in 12 different connections that we have, but an opportunity so very much more. And these are all deep, rich connections upon which we can build. And I think, therefore, as you look to Ireland from your distance and whatever, I thank you for your continuous connection with it, and also, if you like, for your view of it, and also for your wonderful ability
to be able the contribution so many of you are doing to Malta, and how you're able to do that without the slightest contradiction of the feelings that you have for Ireland. And I want to assure you, as President of Ireland, that both Sabina and I, when we travel abroad and meet members of the Irish community abroad, we see all of these as an Irish family that does what Irish family does great, a certain kind of scattering indifferent, whether it is at home or abroad. So, Verbanach don Taki, Mili Buikas, as Bunchana was in Medelia, then Okoicha. Goramila Mahake. Thank you.
climate change, and it's for the 9th, 11th, 12th of the Sustainable Development Goals. Oh, but this is splendid, your garden.
It's a beautiful